It only takes a few seconds for a normal day to turn into the day you remember for the rest of your life. The water didn't look dangerous at first. It looked like light. It looked like a mirror laid flat under the sun, pretending it was harmless, pretending it was just part of the backyard, the way grass and patio chairs were part of it. The surface barely moved, a quiet shimmer, a soft blue that seemed to promise something gentle. And the child, small, curious, still in that age where the world feels like it was made for her to touch, stood inside the house with her hand on the glass door, staring out as if the pool had called her name. Behind her, the kitchen was alive with everyday sounds, a spoon tapping a mug, the rustle of a paper towel roll, the faint hum of a refrigerator that had seen too many summers. Her father moved through it all with the careful speed of a man trying not to spill anything he was carrying inside himself. He wasn't just holding a morning together. He was holding a life together. He glanced up and saw her by the door. "Sweetheart," he said, keeping his voice light like he always tried to. "Not outside alone, okay?" She didn't turn right away. She lifted her fingers and traced a slow line on the glass, fogging a tiny patch with her breath even though the day was already warm. Her curls stuck to the side of her cheek where she'd slept on them. She looked like she was still halfway between dream and waking. Then she turned and nodded, a serious nod, the kind of nod children give when they want to be trusted. "Okay, Daddy," she said. He should have walked over right then. He should have taken her hand. He should have done 100 small things that would have made the next hours different. Instead, he told himself he was watching. He told himself the lock was high. He told himself the gate around the pool was latched. He told himself he would only be in the kitchen for a minute. He had been telling himself versions of that for a long time. Now. On the counter, propped carefully beside the fruit bowl, was a framed photo that never moved. Not even when he cleaned. Not even when he rearranged the clutter trying to make the house feel new again. The frame stayed where it was, like it had roots. It was her mother in the photo, smiling in a way that made the whole image look warmer than it should have been. Not a staged smile, not a camera smile. A real one. Like someone had said something sweet off to the side and she couldn't help herself. She was holding their daughter when she was a baby, and the baby's fist was wrapped around her finger, as if she already understood the world could change, and she needed something steady. Her mother had already passed. The house still carried that truth in small, quiet places. In the way certain drawers were never reorganized. In the way a cardigan still hung on the back of a chair, draped like it belonged there. In the way the air in the hallway seemed to hush when you walked by the bedroom door that used to be theirs. He didn't say it out loud often, not with heavy words, not in a way that would carve it too sharply into the child's mind. But it was there, always there, like a second heartbeat under everything else. Today was supposed to be simple, a warm day, a day where the sun did the work of making people feel okay. They weren't having a big party. They weren't inviting a crowd. Just a quiet pool day, the kind he promised himself he could manage because he wanted his daughter to have something normal, something bright, something that didn't feel like the world had taken something from them. He moved to the pantry and pulled out a box of crackers, then paused when he saw the plastic container of sunscreen. He picked it up, turned it in his hand, and saw her handwriting on the label. A faded marker note from last summer. "Apply twice. Don't forget ears." He exhaled through his nose, a sound almost like a laugh, but not quite. He could picture her saying it, eyebrows raised, playful and firm, like she knew he would forget. Her mother had already passed, but somehow she still caught his wrist before he made a mistake. Not with anything spooky or impossible, just with the way she had organized their life when she was here. Routines, notes, habits, 1,000 invisible guardrails. The child shuffled into the kitchen, dragging a small stuffed animal by its arm. She pressed her cheek into her father's hip the way she did when she was uncertain, when she wanted to attach herself to him without asking. "Can I go swim now?" she asked. "Not yet," he said gently. "We're getting ready. We do things in order." She tilted her head. "Order like Mommy?" The question landed softly, but it still landed. He didn't freeze. He didn't flinch. He had learned how to keep his face steady, but something inside him shifted like a floorboard giving a little underweight. "Yeah," he said, swallowing carefully. "Order like Mommy." She nodded again, satisfied, and walked back toward the living room, toward her toys, toward the glass door that held sunlight like a promise. He watched her for a second longer than usual. He forced himself to stop and check his own thoughts. Pool day, backyard, water, child. He walked to the back door and tested the lock. It clicked. Solid. Then he stepped outside and crossed the patio to the pool gate. The gate wasn't tall enough to relax about, but it was tall enough to make him feel like he had tried. White metal bars. Vertical lines, a latch up near the top. The kind of thing you buy when you're trying to turn fear into something practical. He reached up and lifted the latch. It opened too easily. He frowned. He closed it again and pushed. It held. He jiggled the latch, pushed again, harder. It held, but he didn't like the tiny wiggle, the subtle give, like the gate was only pretending. He had meant to tighten it last week. He had even left a screwdriver on the counter as a reminder. Then the days happened. Work emails, laundry, exhaustion that sat on his shoulders like a physical thing. He tested it one more time and told himself it was fine. He shouldn't have done that. He went back inside, wiped his hands on his shorts, and started packing a small bag like he was preparing for an expedition rather than stepping into his own backyard. Towels, water bottles, snacks, a hat for her, a second hat in case she hated the first one. He moved with that careful efficiency that comes from trying to prevent disasters by being prepared. The child hummed softly to herself in the living room, a tune without words. It was the kind of humming she did when she was content, when she didn't feel watched, when she was building a world out of blocks and stuffed animals. He glanced at the clock. Still early. Plenty of time. Then his phone vibrated on the counter. He looked at the screen and felt his stomach tighten. A message from work. Not an emergency, but urgent enough to pull his attention. Urgent enough to demand a response before the day got away from him. He hesitated. He could ignore it. He should ignore it. But his mind did what it always did. It tried to keep everything from falling apart at once. Work, parenting, grief, finances, the endless responsibility of being the only adult in the house who could catch things before they broke. He tapped the phone and started typing. Just a quick reply, he told himself. Just a sentence. He didn't notice that the child had gone quiet. Silence in a house with a small child is never neutral. Silence is either peace or danger. And you learn, if you're paying attention, that danger has a different kind of silence. A silence that feels like the air is holding its breath. He typed one more word, then hit send. And in that same moment, from the direction of the back door, came a tiny sound. A soft, quick clink. Not loud. Not dramatic. The kind of sound you might not even register if you weren't tuned to fear. He looked up. The child wasn't in the living room anymore. His heart gave a single hard thud, like it had hit a wall. "Sweetheart," he called, keeping his voice steady even as his body already began to move. No answer. He took 3 steps toward the back door and stopped. The glass door was still closed. The lock was still up high. But the curtain beside it, thin and pale, moved gently, as if something had brushed past it. He could see the backyard through the glass. Sunlight on patio stones. A small, inflatable ring leaning against a chair. The pool water, smooth as a sheet. He didn't see her. His mouth went dry. He yanked the door open and stepped onto the patio. "Hey!" he called again, louder now. "Where are you?" He heard a rustle to the right, near the side of the house. He ran, bare feet slapping the warm stone, and there she was, standing near the pool gate, her small hands reaching upward, eyes narrowed in concentration as she tried to do something adult with a child's body. She had dragged a small plastic chair across the patio, the kind you use for a toddler. It was positioned close to the gate, like a step, like a plan. "Stop," he said sharply, the word coming out harder than he intended. She startled and turned, eyes wide. "I was just," she began, and then her gaze flicked to the water, and something inside her expression changed. Not fear, not guilt, something else. Attraction. Like the water had a pull. He reached her in 2 strides and scooped her up, holding her against his chest so tightly. Her stuffed animal got squished between them. "Daddy," she complained softly, more surprised than upset. "No," he said, breathless. "No, no, not like this. You can't come out here alone." "I wanted my float," she said, pointing with one hand toward the pool. A small toy float, bright, shaped like a little animal, bobbed gently on the surface near the edge. It looked close enough to grab if you were careless. It looked harmless. He carried her away from the gate and set her down inside the patio area, far from the water, his hands trembling just enough for him to notice. "You ask," he said, lowering himself to her eye level. "You always ask. You don't come to the pool unless I'm right here." Her eyes filled slightly, not with tears yet, but with that glossy look children get when they're confused by adult intensity. "I did ask," she whispered. "I asked in my head." That sentence hit him strangely. Not because it was magical, not because it was supernatural, because it was exactly the kind of thing a child would say when she missed someone she didn't have the words for. He swallowed. "Even if you ask in your head," he said gently, forcing his voice to soften, "you still have to ask me out loud. Okay?" She nodded slowly. He hugged her again, smaller this time, and carried her back inside. In the kitchen, he set her on the stool and gave her crackers, watched her chew, watched her fingers, watched her breathing like he was counting each little sign of life. Then he went back to the door, stepped outside, and returned to the pool gate with a new kind of anger. Not at her. Not at himself, exactly. At the fragile idea that safety was something you could install once and never think about again. He tested the latch. It clicked. It held. Then he lifted it and closed it again. Click. Hold. Then he pushed harder and felt it, just a small slip, a tiny looseness. Not enough to open fully, but enough to make his stomach drop. He jiggled it again and heard a faint metallic rattle, like something inside was tired. He muttered under his breath and went to find the screwdriver. He tightened what he could. He adjusted the latch plate. He pressed and tested. The sun beat down on his shoulders. Sweat ran along his spine. Finally, it seemed better. He exhaled. He stood there and looked at the pool water, the way it sat so calmly, as if it hadn't just tried to steal his entire world in a handful of seconds. Inside, his daughter's voice floated from the living room. She was singing again, a made-up song, sweet and unaware. He went back in, washed his hands, and tried to reset his mind. It was okay, he told himself. It was a near miss. You caught it, you fixed it, you're fine. But fear doesn't leave just because you tell it to. Fear stays in the body. It waits in the muscles. It makes you see danger in the corners of ordinary things. He told himself he would be extra careful. He told himself he would keep her close. He told himself he wouldn't let another distraction take him away from her. Then his phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't work. It was a call from a number he didn't recognize. He stared at it. He should ignore it. He should. But something about unknown numbers makes you imagine emergencies, makes you imagine school nurses and hospitals and neighbors saying your name in a tone you don't want to hear. He answered. "Hello." A pause. Then a woman's voice, polite and a little rushed. "Hi, is this the resident at this address? I'm with a delivery service. I think I have a package for you, but the label is smudged." His shoulders dropped in relief, then tightened again at the annoyance of being pulled away. "Yes," he said. "That's me. I can come out." He looked toward the living room. His daughter was on the floor with her toys, calm. The back door was locked high. The pool gate was tightened. He could step outside for 10 seconds, accept a package, come back in. He walked to the front door, keeping his eyes on her as long as possible. "I'm going to grab something at the door," he said. "Stay right there, okay?" "Okay," she answered, not looking up. He opened the front door and stepped onto the porch. A delivery driver stood there holding a medium-sized box. He held out a scanner. "Sign here," the driver said. His finger hovered over the screen. Behind him, through the house, everything felt still. He signed quickly, took the box, thanked the driver. As the driver turned to leave, the father caught a sound. Faint, almost swallowed by distance. A soft chime. It wasn't from the front of the house. It was from the backyard. His blood turned cold so fast he felt dizzy. He dropped the box inside the doorway and ran through the house, not even calling her name this time because he didn't want to waste the breath. He rounded the corner into the living room. She wasn't on the floor. His vision narrowed. He sprinted to the back door. The curtain moved again. The glass door was still locked. Still closed. But the small plastic chair from earlier was now inside, positioned near the door like someone had dragged it back. He yanked the door open and stepped onto the patio. His eyes shot to the pool gate. It was closed, but his daughter was standing right in front of it, fingers curled around the bars, her face tilted up, her mouth slightly open as she focused on the latch with intense patience. And the latch, despite what he had done, was lifted just a fraction, not enough to open. Yet. He lunged toward her. "Stop!" he shouted. She flinched again, startled, and her foot slipped on the stone. For a heartbeat, her small body pitched forward. His arms shot out and caught her before she hit the ground, before she hit anything. She clung to his shirt, eyes squeezed shut. He held her, heart pounding so hard it hurt. "I'm sorry," she whispered, voice trembling. I just wanted to see it." "See what?" he asked, voice shaking now despite his effort. She pointed with one small finger, through the bars. In the pool near the edge, the little float had drifted closer, closer than before, almost as if the water had nudged it toward her on purpose. And on the patio, right near the gate, something else lay in the sun. A small object he hadn't noticed earlier, a hair tie, a simple elastic band, faded, the kind that would only matter to someone who knew it belonged to someone. His throat tightened. He hadn't seen that hair tie in months. He stared at it, and for a strange moment, everything felt threaded together. His daughter's curiosity, the loose latch, the chime sound, the way tiny things could slow time down or speed it up. Her mother had already passed. He knew that. He lived with it every day. But he also knew the way love can stay in a house like a scent that doesn't fade, the way routines can reach forward, the way an old note on sunscreen can still protect a child's ears from burning, the way a simple chime by the back door, something her mother had insisted on, hanging because it's cute, could warn you when you were about to lose track of what mattered. He carried his daughter back inside, locked the door, and slid the chair away from it like he was removing a temptation. He sat on the kitchen floor with her in his lap, both of them breathing hard as if they'd run from something that had teeth. "Daddy," she said softly, voice small now. "Are you mad?" He closed his eyes. "No," he whispered. I'm scared. She leaned into him. I'm scared too, she admitted. He kissed the top of her head, and his lips tasted salt from his own sweat and something else, something like grief. I need you to promise me, he said, pulling back just enough to look at her. Promise me you won't go near the pool without me, not even a little. Not even if you're curious, not even if you want your float. She blinked slowly, then nodded. I promise. He believed she meant it. Children usually do. But he also knew curiosity doesn't obey promises. Curiosity waits for the moment you forget to watch. He stood up, set her on the couch with a cartoon, and went back out to the pool gate with a new plan forming in his mind. Not just tightening, not just testing, something stronger. He looked at the latch, then at the way the gate met the post. He pushed. He pulled. He tried to reproduce the slip. This time, when he pushed harder, it happened. A tiny shift. A give. The latch didn't fully release, but it lifted enough to make the gate loosen, enough that a determined small hand could eventually force it. He felt sick. He had convinced himself it was fine. He had trusted a tired piece of metal with his entire life. He stared at the gate and imagined her slipping through. Imagined her small feet on wet stone. Imagined the way sound can disappear when you need it most. He went inside, grabbed his keys, and dug through a drawer until he found a small padlock he barely remembered buying. He held it in his palm like a promise. He returned to the gate and tried to thread it through the latch. It didn't fit cleanly. The spacing was wrong. The angle awkward. He cursed under his breath. Not loud enough for his daughter to hear. He would have to go to the hardware store. He would have to buy the right one. He would have to do it properly. He looked back at the house. Inside, his daughter's laughter rose for a second at something on the screen. Innocent. Unaware. He wiped his face with the back of his hand and told himself he could handle this. He could. He would keep her inside until he fixed it. He locked the back door again. He checked it twice. He slid the chair farther away. He told her they'd swim later, after lunch, after Daddy did boring adult stuff. She pouted a little, then accepted it, because children adapt quickly when you offer them snacks. He made lunch with the kind of concentration usually reserved for surgery. He counted seconds. He listened for every sound in the house. Then, just as he set a plate in front of her, his phone buzzed again. A message from work, marked urgent. He stared at it. His chest tightened. He set the phone face down and forced himself to breathe. Not now, he told himself. Not now. He sat across from his daughter as she ate, watching the way she lifted each bite carefully, watching the way her feet swung under the chair, watching the way she glanced toward the back door between bites like the pool was still in her mind. He tried to start a conversation to anchor her somewhere else. After lunch, he said, voice gentle. We can do something fun inside, maybe that big puzzle, or we can draw. She nodded, mouth full. Then she swallowed and asked, casually, like it was nothing, Can we draw Mommy too? He froze for half a second. Yeah, he said softly. We can. Her face brightened. I remember her hair. His throat tightened again. He didn't want to break in front of her. He didn't want to make her carry his sadness. So he kept his voice calm and said, You do. You remember so much. She looked at him with an expression that was too thoughtful for her age. Mommy tells me things, she said. He forced himself not to panic at the sentence, not to turn it into something scary. Children say things like that. Children speak in feelings and half-formed understanding. Her mother had already passed, yes, but her daughter carried her in memory, in stories, in the way he kept her present with gentle words. What does she tell you? He asked carefully. She shrugged. She tells me wait. A cold ripple slid down his spine. Wait? He repeated. She nodded. Like, when I want to go fast, she says, wait. He stared at her, and his mind flashed to the moments that had saved them today. The slip that didn't become a fall, the chime that pulled him back, the float drifting just out of reach, then closer again. He swallowed. That's a good thing, he said, voice quiet. Waiting is a good thing. She smiled like she was relieved he understood. He cleaned, up lunch, keeping her within arm's reach the entire time. He brought crayons to the table. He set out paper. He drew simple shapes while she drew a big round face with hair that looped like a sun. He tried to let the day feel normal again. Then the doorbell rang. He stiffened. It rang again, longer this time, like someone was leaning on it. He glanced at the clock. He wasn't expecting anyone, no appointments, no friends stopping by. The neighbor usually texted before coming over. His daughter looked up, curious. Stay right here, he said automatically. He walked to the front door, opened it carefully. On the porch stood a man in a simple uniform, holding a clipboard, not threatening, just official enough to raise anxiety. Hi, the man said, polite. Sorry to bother you. We're doing a quick check of the water meter out front. Should take 2 minutes. I just need to access the side gate. The father blinked. Side gate? He repeated, already thinking about fences and gates and all, the ways a child could slip through if you were pulled in the wrong direction. Yes, the man said. Just around the side. I can do it myself, but I need to confirm it's okay to enter your yard. 2 minutes, his mind echoed. 2 minutes is a lifetime. He looked back through the hallway. His daughter was at the table, crayons in hand. Calm. The back door was locked. The chair was moved. The pool gate was still imperfect, but she couldn't reach it unless she got outside. He could say no. He could reschedule. He could insist the man come another day. But the world doesn't always wait for you to be ready. And part of him, the part that was tired of living in constant fear, wanted to handle it like a normal adult, wanted to do the normal thing. Okay, he said cautiously. But please, just the side, and I'll be right here. The man nodded and started walking toward the side of the house. The father stepped back inside and closed the door. He turned to his daughter. Hey, he said, trying to sound casual. Someone's just checking something outside. You keep drawing, okay? I'm going to watch from here. Okay, she said, already back to her drawing. He walked to the living room window that faced the side yard. He could see the man moving along the fence line, crouching briefly near a box, taking notes. Everything seemed under control. Then his phone buzzed again. He ignored it. It buzzed again. He clenched his jaw. He refused to look. And then, so faint he almost missed it, came that sound again. Not from the front, from the back. A soft chime. His stomach dropped so hard it felt like falling. He spun toward the kitchen. His daughter's chair at the table was empty. The crayons were scattered, one rolling slowly across the floor as if pushed by a careless hand. He ran. He didn't think. He didn't breathe properly. He ran through the kitchen and to the back door. The lock was still up high. But the door, somehow, was not fully closed. It was open by the smallest gap, just enough to let in a slice of sunlight, just enough to let in a whisper of outside air, just enough for a child to slip through if she was determined. His hands shook as he flung it wide. The patio was empty. His eyes shot to the pool gate, and his heart stopped. The gate was open, not wide, just open enough, and beyond it, on the bright stone near the pool's edge, his daughter stood with her stuffed animal in her arms, staring down at the water like she was about to take one more step into a world that didn't forgive mistakes. She turned her head slightly, as if she heard him, and her foot shifted. The wet shine on the stone caught the light. Her heel slid. And in that single, terrifying moment, The entire day narrowed to one silent question. Would he reach her in time? He didn't think. He moved. His body surged forward like something older than thought had taken control. His bare feet hit the patio stone hard enough to sting, but he didn't feel it. He only saw the way her heel had skated, across that slick patch near the edge, the way her knee bent too far, the way her arms tightened around the stuffed animal as if hugging it could anchor her to the ground. "Stop! Stay still!" he shouted, but the words were already too late, already chasing the moment instead of shaping it. Her eyes went wide, not defiant, not naughty, just startled. A child caught mid-step, suddenly aware that the world could betray her. The next second stretched. It felt thick, like honey, like the air itself had turned heavy. Her foot slid again. He lunged, arms out, chest burning, and the only thing he could think was, please, please, please. His fingers caught fabric first, the back of her shirt. A tiny fistful. Not enough to lift her, not enough to pull her fully away from the edge. His grip tightened, and he yanked, hard, and the motion made her twist toward him instead of toward the water. Her stuffed animal slipped from her arms and dropped onto the stone with a soft thump. She teetered, the pool. Water right there. A bright sheet waiting. He grabbed her under the arms and hauled her back, dragging her against his body so fast her feet barely touched the ground. He stumbled, almost losing his own balance, and for one horrific heartbeat he imagined both of them going down. He adjusted at the last instant, twisting his hips, letting his shoulder take the impact as he fell backward onto the patio. They hit hard, his elbow scraped, his breath punched out of him, but she was on top of him, safe, held tight against his chest. Her small hands clenched in his shirt like she had just learned how fragile the world was. She didn't cry right away. She stared at him, blinking rapidly, trying to understand why his face looked like that. He pressed his palm to the back of her head and held her like he could weld her to him. "It's okay," he said, but it came out broken. "It's okay. You're okay." Then she started shaking, and the first sob came like a cough, sharp, surprised, as if her body had been waiting for permission to release the fear. I slipped," she cried, voice cracking. "Daddy, I slipped." "I know," he whispered, pulling her closer, rocking once, twice. "I've got you. I've got you." He sat up slowly, forcing himself to move carefully, like he was handling glass. He looked over her shoulder at the open gate. The latch hung there uselessly, tilted like a mouth left open in shock. His heart was still pounding so hard it made his vision pulse. He set her down farther, from the pool, farther than felt necessary, and turned her so she faced the house. "Stay right there," he said, voice low and urgent. "Don't move. Look at me." She nodded quickly, tears running down her cheeks red now, breath hitching. He stepped to the gate, slammed it shut, and pushed until the metal rattled. He tried the latch. It clicked. It held. Then he pushed again, and it shifted with that same sickening give. "No," he breathed, like the gate had insulted him. Like the world had. He looked at the back door. That tiny gap he'd seen. How had it happened? He had locked it. He had checked it. He had moved the chair. He ran to the door and pulled it closed, then locked it with a hard, deliberate motion. He tested it twice, 3 times. The lock held. He turned and saw her standing exactly where he'd put her, bare feet planted, shoulders trembling, eyes fixed on him like she was afraid he might disappear too. He crossed the patio and crouched, cupping her cheeks gently. "Listen," he said, forcing his voice to slow down. "You did nothing bad. Do you understand me?" She sniffed. "But I opened it." His chest tightened. "How did you open it?" She hesitated, eyes flicking away. Small shame, small fear. "It was open," she whispered. He stared at her. "The gate?" She shook her head quickly. "The door." "The back door." He felt his blood run cold again, but now the cold had edges. Now it could cut. "The back door was open?" he asked, trying to keep the question soft so she wouldn't panic further. She nodded. "Just a little. Like it wanted me to go." He swallowed hard. Nothing wanted her to go. Doors didn't want, gates didn't want. But the world, careless and random, could create openings. Tiny ones. And children, with their small bodies and big curiosity, could fit through them. He pulled her into a hug, tight enough to steady both of them, and pressed his cheek to her hair. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay. We're going inside. Right now." He picked up the stuffed animal from the patio, brushed it off, and handed it to her like a lifeline. She hugged it to her chest, still hiccuping. They went inside. He locked the back door again. He walked her into the living room and sat her on the couch, then sat beside her so close their arms touched. He turned off the cartoon. The bright voices felt wrong now, too cheerful, too unaware. He didn't want noise. He wanted truth. But he had to choose how much truth a small child could hold. He took a slow breath. "Do you remember what we said about the pool?" he asked. She nodded, eyes down. "What was the rule?" she whispered. "Not without you." "And if you want to go outside?" I ask out loud. He nodded. "That's right." She chewed her lip, still trembling. "I did ask," she said softly. "I asked. And then what?" he asked gently. Her eyes lifted to his face, huge and wet. "And then the chime rang," she whispered. His stomach twisted. "The chime?" he repeated. She nodded. "It rang, and I looked back. And I waited. Like Mommy says." But then it was quiet again. He stared at her, trying to keep his breathing steady. The chime. The little bell they'd hung by the back door. Something her mother had insisted on because she liked the sound, because she said it made the house feel alive. It wasn't supernatural. It was a piece of metal and string. It rang when the door moved. It rang when air shifted. It rang when something brushed it. Still, his daughter's words wrapped around his spine like a hand. He couldn't let himself spiral. He couldn't put fear into stories. He needed to keep things practical, safe, real. "Okay," he said slowly. "When you heard it, you waited. That was good. That was very good." She sniffed and nodded. He reached for her hand and squeezed it. "I'm going to make the pool safe," he said, voice steady now. "Really safe. And until then, we are not going out back at all. Not for toys, not for floats, not for anything." Her face crumpled a little. "But I like the water." "I know," he whispered. "And I want you to like it. I want you to have fun. I want you to have everything. But water doesn't forgive mistakes, sweetheart. It doesn't mean to be bad. It's just powerful. And you're little." She stared at their joined hands. "Mommy was powerful," she said, almost to herself. His throat tightened. He forced a small nod. "Yeah," he said softly. "She was." Her mother had already passed. He lived with that fact like a stone in his pocket. Always there. Always heavy. But he didn't say it with sharp words. He didn't say it in ways that would carve wounds into his daughter's day. He kept it gentle. He kept it like a truth you carry, not a truth you throw. He leaned forward and pressed a kiss to his daughter's forehead. "I'm going to call someone," he said. "A neighbor. Someone can help us today, okay?" She nodded, squeezing her stuffed animal tighter. He stood, legs still shaky, and walked to the kitchen, phone in hand. He looked at the EAA screen and saw his missed messages, work still trying to pull him, the world still demanding its little pieces. He ignored them. He searched his contacts and found the neighbor's number. An older couple a few houses down who had always been kind, who had once offered to watch his daughter for 10 minutes while he fixed a flat tire. He pressed call. It rang. Once, twice, 3 times. No answer. He tried again, then stopped. He couldn't waste time waiting for people to pick up. He looked out the kitchen window toward the backyard. The pool sat there, bright and quiet, the gate looking perfectly normal now, like it hadn't just failed them. He felt anger rise again, hot, clean anger that could become action. He opened a drawer and dug until he found a roll of thick tape. Not elegant, not permanent, but something. Then he saw the padlock he'd tried earlier, sitting uselessly on the counter. He grabbed both and marched back to the sliding door. He didn't open it. Not yet. He checked the lock. Again, then grabbed a chair and wedged it against the track, not because it was foolproof, but because it would create resistance. An extra step, an extra second. Then he turned and looked at his daughter. She was still on the couch, small and still, the way children get after a scare. Too quiet, too aware of their own heartbeat. He walked to her and knelt. "I need you to stay with me," he said, eyes on hers. "Like a shadow. Wherever I go inside this house, you come too. Okay?" She nodded, quickly. "Okay." He took her hand and led her into the hallway, then to the laundry room, where a side door opened into the backyard. He rarely used it, which was exactly why it made him nervous now. Forgotten doors were the ones that betrayed you. He locked it, too. Then he looked around and realized the house had too many exits for a man trying to hold everything alone. He felt the weight of it. Not just the doors, the responsibility, the way her mother used to share it, the way she used to be, the one who thought of things he didn't. Her mother had already passed, and he was doing his best to learn how to be 2 people at once. He stood in the hallway for a moment, daughter's hand in his, and closed his eyes. He remembered his wife's voice, calm, firm, not scolding, guiding. "Double check," she'd say. "Don't assume. If you don't like the way it feels, fix it." He opened his eyes. "Okay," he whispered to himself. "Okay, we fix it." He brought his daughter back to the living room and set her, up with paper and crayons again, right at the coffee table this time so he could see her without turning his head. "Draw," he said softly. "Draw Mommy's hair. Draw anything. Just stay right here." She nodded, already picking a crayon like drawing could stitch her back together. He moved to the front door and stepped onto the porch, scanning the street. The man checking the water meter was gone. The sidewalk was empty. The day looked normal. Birds, heat shimmer, a distant lawnmower. Normal was a disguise. He went back inside, grabbed his keys, and looked at his daughter. "I need to go to the store," he said, and the words felt impossible. Her face tightened instantly. "No," she whispered. His heart clenched. "I know," he said, crouching. "I know you don't want me to go. I don't want to go either. But I need something that will lock the pool gate properly, so we never have to feel this way again." She stared at him, tears threatening again. "I'll be fast," he promised, then corrected himself, because promises like that were dangerous. "I'll be careful, but I can't leave you alone, so I'm going to take you with me." Her shoulders relaxed a fraction. "Together?" "Together," he said, squeezing her hands. He stood, moved quickly but not frantic, and started packing the basics. Shoes for her, a water bottle, her stuffed animal. He couldn't stop his mind from playing the worst versions of every scenario, but he forced himself to keep moving. He guided her into her shoes, then grabbed his own. His hands still shook as he tied laces. Before leaving, he walked through the house again like a man checking a perimeter. Doors locked, windows secure, back door wedged, laundry door locked. He went to the back sliding door and stared at it for a moment. A thin slice of sunlight leaked in around the curtain. It looked innocent. He pressed his palm flat against the glass, as if he could feel whether it was truly sealed. Then the chime made a tiny, soft sound, just a tremble, like it had been brushed by air. He flinched. His daughter noticed. She stepped closer, hugging her stuffed animal. "Daddy," she said quietly. "It's okay. Mommy says wait." He swallowed. "Yeah," he whispered. "We're going to wait. We're going to be smart." He opened the front door and stepped out with her, holding her hand like he might never let go. The car ride was short. He drove too carefully, hands tight on the wheel, eyes flicking between the road and the rearview mirror where he could see her, small face watching him. At a stoplight, she whispered, "Are you mad at the pool?" He almost laughed, but it came out as a soft exhale. "No," he said. "I'm mad at myself for thinking it was safe enough." She looked out the window. Mommy would make it safe. He nodded. She would. The hardware store smelled like wood and metal and air conditioning. It was bright, loud in a quiet way, filled with the clatter of carts and distant beeps. He lifted his daughter into the cart seat, buckled her in, and kept one hand on the cart and one hand near her at all times, like he was afraid she might vanish if he blinked. He found the aisle with locks and latches. He stared at the options, overwhelmed by how many versions of secure existed. He chose a heavy-duty latch lock made for gates, plus a new padlock with a thick shackle. He grabbed extra screws, a drill bit, and a small spring mechanism that would help the gate close automatically. He didn't want good enough, not anymore. At checkout, his daughter rested her chin on her stuffed animal and watched him with sleepy eyes. "Are we going home now?" she asked. "Yeah," he said, "and then we fix it." She nodded, as if that sentence meant everything. On the drive back, his phone buzzed again. Work. Again. He ignored it. When they pulled into the driveway, the sun was higher, hotter, the kind of heat that makes people careless, the kind of heat that makes you want to move quickly just to get inside. He resisted the urge to rush. Rushing was how doors stayed half open. Rushing was how latches got close enough. He carried the bag of hardware in one hand and held his daughter's hand with the other as they walked inside. Immediately he felt it. The air inside the house was different. Not cold, not warm, just off like a room after someone has walked through it. He stopped in the entryway. His daughter squeezed his hand. "What?" He listened. No TV, no appliances doing anything unusual, just the faint hum of the fridge. And then, so soft he almost convinced himself he imagined it, the back chime trembled again, a single, delicate ring. He stared down the hallway toward the kitchen. His pulse spiked. He hadn't opened the back door. He hadn't touched it since they left. He tightened his grip on his daughter's hand. "Stay with me," he whispered. They walked slowly toward the kitchen, each step deliberate. The living room looked normal, the crayons still on the table. Her drawing half finished, a round face with looping hair. But the sliding door curtain moved slightly, as if a draft had found its way in. He approached the door. The chair was still wedged in the track, exactly where he left it. The lock was still up high. He reached out and touched the handle anyway. Cold metal. Solid. He leaned closer, peering at the seam where the door met the frame. And that's when he saw it. Not a big opening. Not enough for an adult to notice at a glance. A thin gap. Barely a breath of space. Like the door had been pulled, just slightly, against the lock's resistance. Like something had tested it. His mouth went dry. He looked down at his daughter. She was staring at the door too, eyes wide, as if she sensed the same wrongness. "Daddy," she whispered, I didn't touch it. I know, he said, voice tight. He didn't want to think in ghosts. He didn't want to think in impossible things. Her mother had already passed, and he wasn't going to turn that into horror. He was going to stay grounded, practical, real. But doors don't loosen themselves when you wedge them. Locks don't strain without pressure. He set the hardware bag on the counter with shaking hands. He walked to the back door and tested the lock again. It clicked, but it sounded tired. He pulled the door closed firmly and pushed the lock into place with force. Then he tested it again. He pulled. It held. He pulled harder. It held, but the frame gave a faint groan of wood. His stomach flipped. The lock was holding, but the door itself, the track, the alignment, wasn't perfect. It had more give than he realized. Enough for a determined push from the other side, or a strong gust, or a bad fit. Enough for danger to squeeze through. He looked out through the glass. The pool gate waited. The water glittered. He turned back to his daughter. "Okay," he said, voice low and firm. "We're fixing the gate right now. You're staying inside. You sit on that chair where I can see you the whole time, and you do not move. Deal?" She nodded quickly. "Deal." He opened the sliding door just enough to slip out, keeping his body between the gap and his daughter. He stepped onto the patio and immediately felt the heat hit him like a wall. He closed the door behind him and locked it again, then checked through the glass to make sure she was still there. She was. Small, still, watching him like her eyes could keep him safe too. He walked to the pool gate with the new latch and tools. He knelt, measuring, aligning, drilling. Sweat ran down his temples. His shirt stuck to his back. He worked fast but careful, every screw a small vow. Halfway through, the drill slipped and made a sharp squeal against the metal. He flinched, then forced himself to steady his hands. He glanced up at the house. His daughter was still visible through the glass, sitting exactly where he told her. He returned to the latch, tightened, adjusted, tested. The new latch clicked with a satisfying certainty. No wiggle, no give. He threaded the padlock, threw and snapped it shut. Then he pushed against the gate with all his strength. It didn't move. Relief hit him so hard he almost sagged. He exhaled shakily and looked at the water again. It still looked harmless. It still looked like light. But now, at least, it had a boundary that didn't lie. He stood and wiped his hands on his shorts, then turned to go back inside. And that's when he noticed something that made his breath stop. On the patio stone near the sliding door, right by the threshold, lay a small object, a tiny metal key, not his house key, not a car key, a small plain key that looked like it belonged to a padlock. He stared at it, confused. He hadn't dropped a key. The padlock he bought came with keys, but they were still in his pocket. He hadn't even opened the little key ring yet. He took a step closer, heart pounding. The key looked old, slightly tarnished, like it had been outside for a long time. He picked it up between two fingers. As soon as he did, the back chime inside the house rang once, clear and bright, as if the door had moved. His head snapped up. Through the glass, his daughter wasn't on the chair anymore. She was standing. And she was staring past him, not at the gate, not at the pool, at something on the other side of the patio, near the fence line. Her face had gone still again, that strange quiet. He banged on the glass. "Sweetheart, stay inside!" She didn't look at him. Her small hand lifted, pointing toward the corner of the yard. And then she mouthed words he couldn't hear through the glass, but he could read them on her lips with terrifying clarity. "Daddy, someone's there." His heart slammed so hard it stole his breath. "Sweetheart," he said sharply, pounding the glass with his palm. "Look at me. Look at me right now." She didn't. Her finger stayed raised, small and steady, pointing toward the far corner of the yard where the fence met a line of shrubs that had grown too wild over the years. The afternoon light cast long shadows there, stretching them into shapes that felt heavier than they should have been. "Daddy," she said again, quieter now. "Someone's there." His mind raced through every rational explanation it could grab. A neighbor, a delivery mistake, someone cutting through yards, a trick of light, a reflection, fear exaggerating nothing into something. He forced himself to breathe. "There's no one there," he said, even as his eyes darted in the direction she pointed. "You're safe inside. Stay inside." He reached for the sliding door handle, still gripping the small key in his other hand, and unlocked it with shaking fingers. The chime trembled again as he opened the door just enough to step through. Heat rushed past him. The smell of chlorine and cut grass filled his lungs. He closed the door immediately behind him and locked it, turning back to the yard with his shoulders squared, body tense and ready. "Hello?" he called out, voice loud and firm, the way you speak when you want fear, to think twice. Nothing answered. The yard was still, too still. Leaves barely moved. The pool water lay flat again, innocent and reflective. The fence stood tall, weathered, its boards slightly uneven from age but intact. He scanned left to right, step by careful step, making sure he kept the house, and his daughter, within his peripheral vision. "Is someone there?" he called again. Silence. He walked slowly toward the corner of the yard, every sense sharpened. His ears picked up tiny sounds, the click of an insect, the distant hum of traffic, the faint creak of wood as the fence settled in the heat. No footsteps, no voices. When he reached the shrubs, he crouched and pushed aside the branches with his free hand. Dust puffed into the air. Dry leaves crunched. Nothing. He stood and leaned closer to the fence, peering through the narrow gaps between boards. Beyond it lay the neighboring property, empty at the moment, a stretch of grass and a shed near the back. No movement. His pulse didn't slow. He turned back toward the house. Through the glass, his daughter stood frozen where he'd last seen her, face pale, eyes fixed on him like she was afraid he might vanish if she blinked. He raised a hand, palm out, the universal sign for stay. She nodded stiffly. He walked back across the patio, senses still buzzing, and stopped short when his foot brushed something small on the stone. The key. He looked down at it again, confusion tightening his chest. He turned it over in his fingers. Old. Metal. No markings. Too small for a door. Exactly the size you'd use for a padlock. He glanced at the new padlock on the gate. Its keys were still sealed together on a ring in his pocket. He checked quickly, heart pounding. They were there. This key didn't belong to anything he'd touched today. He didn't like that. He walked to the sliding door and held the key up so his daughter could see it through the glass. "Did you see this before?" he asked, raising his voice slightly so she could hear. She shook her head slowly. "No," she said. "It was just there." Her words echoed his own thoughts from earlier. Just there. Like things that mattered most often were. He unlocked the door again and stepped inside, locking it firmly behind him. The chair was still wedged. The room felt too quiet, as if the house itself was listening. He crouched in front of her. "Tell me exactly what you saw," he said, keeping his tone calm even though every nerve in his body buzzed. "Don't guess. Just tell me what you remember." She hugged her stuffed animal tighter, knuckles whitening. "I didn't see a face," she said carefully, choosing her words the way children do when they know they're being taken seriously. "I just felt like someone was standing there, like when Mommy used to stand behind me and I didn't know until I turned around." His chest tightened. "Did you see anyone move?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, But it felt crowded. That word hit him harder than he expected. Crowded. He swallowed. Okay, he said quietly. Thank you for telling me. He stood and paced the length of the living room, trying to ground himself in facts. No footprints, no sound. Fence intact. Neighbors nearby. Daylight. Everything pointed to nothing. And yet, he looked down at the key in his hand again. He didn't believe in signs. He believed in maintenance schedules and backup plans and redundancy. He believed in calling for help when things felt off. He reached for his phone. Before he could unlock it, the doorbell rang. The sound exploded through the house. His daughter gasped and clutched his leg. He froze, heart slamming, mind instantly replaying the image of her pointing at the fence. The doorbell rang again, short, firm. He moved to the front door and looked through the peephole. A familiar face stared back. The neighbor. Relief rushed through him so fast it left him lightheaded. He opened the door. "Hey," the neighbor said, concern already written into his features. "Sorry to bother you like this. My wife thought she heard yelling from the backyard earlier." The father exhaled shakily. Yeah," he said. "I'm sorry. There was a scare." The neighbor nodded slowly, eyes flicking past him into the house, landing on the small figure clinging to his leg. "She okay?" He knelt and wrapped an arm around his daughter. "She is. Thanks to luck and some timing." The neighbor grimaced. "Pool?" He nodded. "Those things'll give you gray hair," the neighbor said gently. "Mind if I take a look at the fence line? I was already walking the perimeter on my side. We had someone cut through yards last week." That sent a cold ripple through his spine. "Someone cut through?" he asked. "Yeah," the neighbor said. "Teenagers probably. Shortcut. Didn't do any damage, but still." The father hesitated only a second. "Yes," he said. "Please. I'd appreciate it." He locked the front door behind them and followed the neighbor around the side of the house, keeping his daughter close. One hand on her shoulder at all times. They stopped near the fence corner where she had pointed earlier. The neighbor crouched and inspected the ground, running his fingers over the dirt, the base of the boards, the hinges. "Fence looks fine," he said after a moment. "Gate's solid now. You did good work." "Thank you," the father said, though his stomach still churned. The neighbor straightened and scanned the yard. If someone was here, they didn't stay long. "What about this?" the father asked, holding up the small key. The neighbor squinted at it, then shook his head. "Doesn't look like anything from around here. Could have been dropped a long time ago. Kids play everywhere." "Maybe." The neighbor smiled at the daughter. "You gave your dad a scare, huh?" She looked up at him solemnly. "I waited," she said. "Like Mommy says." The neighbor blinked, clearly unsure how to respond. The father squeezed her shoulder gently. "She did," he said. "She waited." They went back inside after a few more minutes. The neighbor promised to keep an eye out and left with a reassuring nod. The house felt different once the door closed behind him. Not haunted, not dangerous. Just changed. He locked every door again, then sat with his daughter on the couch, holding her until her breathing evened out. Time passed in strange fragments after that. The sun shifted, shadows moved. The fear softened, then flared again whenever a sound happened unexpectedly. He made dinner earlier than usual, keeping her within arm's reach the entire time. She followed him from room to room like he'd asked, quiet but compliant. At one point, while he stirred a pot on the stove, she looked up at him and asked, "Daddy, why does the house make noises?" He smiled faintly. "Because houses are old," he said, "and because they stretch when it's hot, and because wind likes to sneak in." She considered that. "Mommy said houses breathe." He paused. "Yeah." he said softly. They do. After dinner, he ran a bath for her, staying in the bathroom the whole time, sitting on the closed toilet lid while she splashed gently. He watched the water line like it was another pool, another reminder that safety lived in attention. When he tucked her into bed later, she asked him to leave the door open. Just a little, she said. He left it cracked, hallway light spilling in. He sat on the edge of her bed longer than usual, brushing her hair back with his fingers. You were very brave today, he said. She frowned slightly. I was scared. Brave doesn't mean not scared, he replied. It means you listen when something feels wrong. She nodded sleepily. Daddy, she murmured. Yes? If Mommy already passed, she said slowly, the phrase careful and gentle the way he always used it, how does she still tell me to wait? His throat tightened. He chose his words with care. Because love doesn't leave when people do, he said. It teaches us things that stay. She seemed satisfied with that. Her eyes closed. He waited, until her breathing deepened before standing and stepping into the hallway. He walked the house again. Doors, windows, locks. The back door held firm now, the wedge solid. The pool gate outside was a fortress. Still, he couldn't shake the image of that thin gap in the door. The key on the stone. Her finger pointing at empty space. He stood alone in the kitchen and looked at the framed photo on the counter. I'm trying, he whispered, not sure who he was talking to. I really am. The house answered with silence. Later that night, long after the world outside had gone quiet, he lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to every creak and sigh of the house. Just as sleep finally began to pull him under, a sound cut through the darkness. Soft, metallic, the back chime. He sat up instantly, heart racing. The sound came again, faint, deliberate, as if someone were touching the door. And this time, from down the hall, he heard his daughter's bedroom door slowly creak open. He was out of bed before his feet touched the floor. The sound of the chime lingered in the air, thin and bright, like it had been placed there on purpose. Not loud, not frantic, just enough to cut through the dark. He stepped into the hallway barefoot, moving fast but controlled, the way you move when panic is close, but you refuse to let it lead. The house was dim, washed in soft yellow light from the night lamp near his daughter's room. Shadows stretched longer than they should have, pulling at the corners of his vision. Her bedroom door was open now. It hadn't been when he tucked her in. Sweetheart, he whispered, keeping his voice low. No answer. His chest tightened. He crossed the hallway in 3 strides and reached the doorway. She wasn't in her bed. The blankets were pushed back, one corner hanging over the side like she'd left in a hurry, or like she hadn't meant to leave at all. He felt cold all the way through. Hey, he said again, louder now, still careful not to sound, like fear. Where are you? A small shape moved at the far end of the hall. She stood there in her pajamas, stuffed animal tucked under one arm, hair sticking up on one side from sleep. Her eyes were open but unfocused, like she was halfway between dreaming and waking. Relief crashed into him so fast his knees almost buckled. He crossed the space and crouched in front of her, hands landing gently on her shoulders. What are you doing up? He asked, forcing his voice into steadiness. She blinked, slowly. I heard it. He swallowed. Heard what? The bell, she said. It rang again. His grip tightened just a fraction. Did you leave your room when you heard it? She nodded. I thought you were awake. I am now, he said softly. Did you touch the back door? She shook her head immediately, curls bouncing. No, I stayed in the hall. I promise. He searched her face for signs of mischief, confusion, anything that would explain this away. He found only sincerity and a trace of fear. "Okay," he said quietly. "Okay, come with me." He scooped her up without asking and carried her down the hallway, his arms wrapped around her like a shield. She rested her head against his shoulder, warm and solid and real. The back of the house was darker at night. The kitchen lights were off, the counters reflecting only faint shapes from the window. Outside, the backyard was a blackened stretch, the pool invisible except for a faint glimmer where the moonlight touched it. The chime hung by, the sliding door still, motionless. He stopped a few feet away and stared at it. Nothing moved. He adjusted his hold on his daughter and reached for the light switch with his free hand. The overhead light snapped on, flooding the room with harsh brightness that felt almost rude after the dark. He scanned everything. The chair was still wedged in the door track. The lock was still up. The handle hadn't shifted. He set his daughter down on the kitchen stool and knelt in front of her. "I need you to tell me something," he said. "Did you hear the bell once or more than once?" She thought for a moment. "Once," she said. Then she frowned. "No, twice. But not fast, like someone waited." His heart sank. "Waited how?" She shrugged. "Like they didn't want to be loud." He closed his eyes briefly, forcing himself to stay grounded. Houses make sounds, metal cools, air pressure changes. Night exaggerates everything. Still. He stood and walked to the sliding door. He didn't open it. He just leaned, close, inspecting the frame, the track, the lock. He pressed against it lightly. It didn't budge. He pressed harder. Still nothing. He exhaled through his nose, slow and deliberate, then turned back to her. "It's okay," he said, though the words felt thin. "Sometimes the bell moves when the air changes. At night, everything sounds bigger." She nodded, but she didn't look convinced. "Daddy," she said softly, "the house feels busy." The word again. Crowded. Busy. He forced a small smile. "That's because it's late. Go back to bed. I'll stay awake for a while." She hesitated, then shook her head. "Can I stay with you?" He didn't even pretend to consider it. "Yes." He carried her to the couch and sat with her curled against his side, her head tucked under his chin. He turned on a lamp instead of the overhead light, softening the room again. Minutes passed, then more. The house remained quiet. Her breathing slowed. He didn't. His mind replayed the day in sharp fragments. The slip near the pool. The open gate. The key on the patio. Her pointing at the fence. The neighbor's words about someone cutting through yards. He reached into his pocket and felt the outline of the padlock keys. Solid. Reassuring. He looked toward the back door again. The chime hung there, innocent and still. He told himself he was overreacting. That fear had rewired his senses. That one bad day didn't mean the house was unsafe. Still, he didn't sleep. When morning came, it arrived quietly, pale light creeping through the windows like it didn't want to disturb anything. He was still on the couch, stiff and exhausted, his daughter sprawled across him, stuffed animal wedged between them. He shifted carefully and checked the back door again before doing anything else. Locked. Secure. The chime didn't move. He made breakfast with the same careful rhythm as the night before, keeping her close, letting her sit at the table where he could see her at all times. She was quieter than usual, not withdrawn, just thoughtful. "Daddy," she said around a bite of toast, "are we going to the pool today?" He paused. "No," he said gently, "not today." She nodded, accepting it without argument. After breakfast, he decided they needed air, not the backyard, somewhere neutral, somewhere that didn't hold yesterday in every corner. They went to the front yard instead. He set her up with chalk on the sidewalk while he sat on the steps, coffee cooling untouched in his hands. The street was calm. A few neighbors passed, waved, life moving forward like nothing had happened. He watched her draw circles and lines, a sun in the corner, a stick figure with long looping hair. "Is that Mommy?" he asked softly. She nodded. "She's watching." He didn't correct her. He didn't need to. The morning passed without incident. No chimes, no strange sounds. The fear loosened its grip just enough for him to breathe again. By noon, he almost felt foolish for how tightly wound he'd been. Almost. He brought her inside for lunch and checked the back door again out of habit. That's when he noticed it. The chair wedged against the sliding door track had shifted. Not much, just an inch or two. He stared at it, heart starting to pound. He was sure he'd placed it firmly. He remembered pressing it in, testing the resistance. He crouched and pulled the chair away, then wedged it back, pushing harder this time. Maybe it had vibrated loose. Maybe he hadn't pushed it far enough before. Maybe. He straightened and looked at the lock again. Still locked. He ran his hand along the frame, feeling for gaps. Nothing obvious. Still, unease crawled up his spine. That afternoon, a knock came at the front door. He froze, then forced himself to move. It was another neighbor, a woman from across the street, holding a small package. "This was delivered to my house by mistake," she said with a smile. "Thought I'd bring it over." "Thank you," he said, taking it. As she turned to leave, she paused. "Everything okay? You seemed stressed yesterday." He hesitated, then nodded. "Just a scare. Pool safety." She grimaced sympathetically. "Those things will age you 10 years. He smiled faintly and closed the door. Inside, his daughter was sitting on the floor with her crayons again. He opened the package absently. Inside was a small item he didn't remember ordering, a replacement chime. He stared at it, confused. The label showed his address, his name. He checked the order history on his phone. Nothing. No confirmation. No receipt. He set the box down slowly. "Daddy?" his daughter said, watching his face. "Where did this come from?" he murmured. She tilted her head. "Mommy liked bells." His throat tightened. He closed the box and put it on the counter, far from the door. That evening, he called the hardware store to confirm the latch model, to reassure himself that it was solid. He called the neighbor again and thanked him for checking the fence. Everything was normal. Too normal. When night came again, he left, the living room lamp on. He checked the doors twice, 3 times. He put his daughter to bed and sat with her until she slept, then stayed in the hallway chair instead of going to his own room. The house creaked as it cooled. Pipes ticked softly. The refrigerator hummed. He told himself this was just what houses did. Then just after midnight, the chime rang. Once, not loud, not accidental. He was on his feet instantly, heart in his throat. The sound came again, a second gentle ring, from the high back door. He sprinted down the hallway. His daughter's bedroom door was still closed this time. He flung it open anyway. She was in bed, asleep. Relief barely had time to register before the chime rang a third time. Closer. Sharper. He turned and ran for the kitchen. The sliding door was still closed, locked, the chair wedged, but the chime was moving, swaying gently, as if something had brushed past it. He pressed his hand to the glass and peered out into the darkness. At first, he saw nothing. Then, near the fence line, he saw movement. Not a shape, not a person. The gate, the pool gate. The padlock he'd installed was hanging open, dangling uselessly from the latch. His blood ran cold. He knew he had locked it. He had tested it. He had pushed against it with all his strength. The key was still in his pocket. He spun toward the hallway, heart hammering, and from behind him, From the darkness beyond the glass came the softest sound of all. A child's float bumping gently against the pool edge, over and over and over, over and over and over. The soft, hollow tap of plastic against stone came through the glass like a heartbeat that didn't belong to the house. The sound wasn't loud enough to wake someone in another room, but it was loud enough to make his brain fill in everything that could follow it. His hand flattened against the sliding door, fingers splayed, as if he could hold the world still by pressing on it. Outside, the backyard was a slab of darkness. The pool was mostly invisible, except for the faint shimmer where moonlight caught the water, and the pale oval of the float nudging the edge again and again, obedient to some tiny current. He dragged his eyes away from the pool and locked them on the gate. The padlock was open, hanging. A small metallic shape, useless now, swinging slightly on the latch like someone had just touched it. His mouth went dry. His pulse climbed into his throat. He didn't move for a second because moving meant choosing what kind of fear this was. A mistake. A trick of perception. Or something else. He forced himself to check his pocket with shaking fingers. The keys to the new padlock were there. The ring pressed into his palm, familiar and solid. So how? He stopped the thought before it finished. Not now. First, his daughter. He turned and ran down the hallway on silent feet, not daring to shout her name. Shouting would waste air. Shouting would make fear louder than it needed to be. He flung her, bedroom door open. She was still in bed, curled into the blankets, one arm thrown around her stuffed animal. Her breathing was slow and deep, the kind of sleep that doesn't know the world is dangerous. Relief hit him so hard it almost made him dizzy, but it didn't settle him. It only gave him one thing to protect. He stepped inside and pulled the blanket higher around her shoulders, then placed his palm lightly on her back for a moment, feeling the rise and fall. "Stay asleep," he begged silently. "Please, just stay asleep." He backed out of the room and closed the door until it was almost shut, leaving it cracked the way she liked, just enough for hallway light to spill in. Then he went to the kitchen, grabbed his phone, and stopped with it in his hand, staring at the screen. He could call the police. He should call the police if he thought someone was out there. But saying it out loud would make it real in a way his body wasn't ready for. He forced himself to breathe anyway and tapped the neighbor's number first, the man who had checked the fence line earlier, the one who had said teenagers had been cutting through yards. It rang once, twice. No answer. He tried again, then stopped. He couldn't wait on someone else to wake up. He moved to the front door, checked the lock, then grabbed the keys from the hook and slipped his feet into shoes without tying them properly. Every sound felt amplified. The click of the key ring, the soft scrape of rubber on tile. He didn't open the back door. He didn't step into the yard. Not alone. Not with his daughter sleeping down the hall. Instead, he did what fear and responsibility demanded at the same time. He called. His thumb hovered over the emergency number long enough for his mind to try to talk him out of it. Maybe the lock had popped open on its own. Maybe you didn't close it right. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe you'll look ridiculous. He pressed the button anyway. When the operator answered, his voice came out steadier than he felt, because steadiness was a kind of survival. "I think someone may have been in my backyard," he said quietly. "My pool gate lock is open. My child is asleep. I'm inside the house." Questions followed. Address, description, are doors locked, any signs of forced entry, is anyone hurt? "No," he kept saying. "No, no." The word became a chant. He ended the call with instructions to stay inside, keep the doors locked, and wait. He did exactly that. He turned off the overhead kitchen light and left only the lamp on, because harsh light made shadows sharper. Soft light made the house feel like it was still his. Still, He couldn't stop himself from moving room to room, checking what he had already checked. Locks, windows, the side laundry door, the front door. He passed the counter and his eyes landed on the small box he'd received earlier, the replacement chime he didn't remember ordering. The cardboard sat there like a question. He didn't touch it. He went back to the living room and sat on the couch, phone in his hand, listening. Outside, the float stopped tapping for a few seconds. The silence that followed was worse than the sound. Then it started again, over and over. He stared at the sliding door and felt his thoughts slip into the worst places. He pictured a hand on the gate, a shadow leaning over the water, someone moving quietly, not wanting to be loud, the way his daughter had said. He pulled the thought back before it grew teeth. This is a yard. This is a gate. This is a lock. This is a problem that can be solved. But fear wasn't interested in logic. Fear was interested in his daughter's small body and the way water didn't bargain. He stood and walked to the framed photo of his wife on the kitchen counter. He hadn't meant to. He didn't even realize he'd moved until he was standing there, staring at her smile in the dim light. Her mother had already passed. He still couldn't say it without something in him cracking, not because the words were heavy, but because the absence was. He traced the edge of the frame with one finger. "I'm trying," he whispered again, voice barely there. "I'm doing everything I can." He waited, ridiculous as it was, for the feeling of her steadiness to settle into him, for the memory of her routines. Double check, don't assume, if it feels wrong, fix it, to become a hand on his shoulder. The house answered with the same quiet it always had. He let his head drop for a moment, forehead hovering near the cool glass of the frame, and felt a sudden sharp urge to sit on the floor and cry like a child himself. He didn't. He couldn't. There wasn't room for collapse when you were the only wall holding the roof up. He heard a faint sound in the hallway and snapped his head up. Not the chime. A soft shuffle. His breath caught. He moved quickly, barefoot again now, without realizing when he'd kicked his shoes off, and went down the hall. Her bedroom door was still cracked. The hallway light spilled in. He pushed the door open and saw her in bed, unchanged, still sleeping. Relief returned like a wave that left him weak. He sat on the edge of her bed and watched her for several seconds, the way you watch something precious when you're terrified the world might take it. He smoothed her hair back from her forehead and whispered, "Stay." She didn't wake. He stood and went back out to the hall. He waited. Minutes crawled. Then, at last, flashing lights painted the front windows in muted blue and red. The sound of a car door. Closing followed, then footsteps on the walkway. He didn't open the door until he saw the uniform through the peephole. When he did, he kept the chain on. "Sir," the officer said quietly, "you called about someone possibly in your backyard?" "Yes," he replied, voice hoarse. "My daughter's asleep. I haven't gone outside." The officer nodded and spoke in low tones, calm and practiced. Another officer moved around the side of the house with a flashlight, sweeping the shadows. "Any sign of forced entry?" the first officer asked. "No," he said. Then he hesitated. "I found a strange key earlier, and I received a package I didn't order." The officer's eyes sharpened slightly. "A key?" He retrieved it from the counter with 2 fingers as if it might bite him, and showed it. The officer examined it briefly, then handed it back. "Could be old. Could belong to a previous lock. Doesn't mean much by itself, but we'll check your yard." He unlocked the chain and let them in quietly, leading them toward the kitchen. He pointed to the sliding door. "My pool gate. The lock was open." The officer nodded, then glanced at the hallway. "Your child?" "Asleep," he said. "Please, keep voices low." The officer's expression softened. Of course. They moved as a pair, one staying near the door, one stepping outside into the backyard with a flashlight. He stayed inside, pressed close to the glass, watching as the beam cut across patio stones and grass. The officer reached the pool gate. The padlock hung open exactly as he'd seen. The officer lifted it gently, inspected the latch, then shone the light on the ground beneath. He crouched. His light moved in small circles, searching for prints, for scuffs, for anything that told a story. He looked up at the house and gestured with his hand, a small wave that meant, "Come out here." But the father shook his head sharply and pointed back toward the hallway. The officer nodded in understanding and returned his attention to the ground. After a moment, he stood and walked the fence line, sweeping shrubs and boards with the flashlight, checking for broken slats, disturbed branches. Everything looked normal. That was the problem. Normal was what danger hid behind. The officer came back to the gate and lifted the padlock again, turning it over in his gloved hand, then closed it without locking it, testing how it sat. He leaned close to the latch and muttered something to the other officer, who remained nearer the patio. The father opened, the sliding door just a crack, and whispered, "What is it?" The officer turned toward him, face half lit by the flashlight. "This lock wasn't forced," he said softly. "At least not in an obvious way. It looks like it was opened." "Opened how?" His voice cracked. The officer paused. "With a key, most likely." The father felt the world tilt. "But my keys—" The officer held up a hand. "I understand. I'm not saying it was your keys. I'm saying it doesn't look like someone broke it. It looks like someone unlocked it." His gaze flicked to the father's hand, where the old tarnished key sat, forgotten for a second. "That key you found. Have you tried it?" His stomach churned. He didn't want to. Trying it would make the connection real, but he needed answers more than he needed comfort. With shaking fingers, he held the key out through the narrow crack of the door. The officer took it, turned back to the gate, and inserted it into the padlock. The metal clicked softly. The lock opened. The father's breath left him in a broken rush. For a second, the night went very quiet again, as if the world itself had decided to listen. The officer removed the key, closed the lock, and looked toward the house. "This key fits," he said, voice low. "Which means either this padlock model matches an older one someone used here, or this padlock isn't as new to this yard as you think." "But I bought it," he whispered. "Today. I bought it today." The officer's face remained calm, but his eyes sharpened. "Did anyone else handle the package? Did you leave the gate unattended?" He tried to think. The store, the drive, the house, the gap in the sliding door, the chime in the night. "No, I don't think so." The officer nodded slowly. "We'll take a report. We'll check the area. But the most important thing tonight is your child. Keep her inside. Don't use the pool. Consider adding cameras or motion lights if you can." The father swallowed hard. "Someone was here." The officer didn't confirm it directly. He didn't deny it either. "It's possible," he said carefully. "Sometimes people cut through yards. Sometimes kids are stupid. Sometimes someone saw a pool and got curious. But with a child in the house, we treat it seriously." The second officer returned from the fence line and shook his head slightly. Nothing obvious. The first officer handed the old key back through the crack in the door. The father took it as if it weighed 100 pounds now. "Where exactly did you find this?" the officer asked. "On the patio," he said. "Near the sliding door. Like it was placed there." The officer's expression tightened just slightly at the last words. Not because he believed in mysteries, but because he knew how fear made everything feel intentional. "Old keys turn up," he said. "But given everything tonight, keep it. Don't leave it outside. And if you see anyone, call again." The officers stayed a few more minutes, shining lights, checking the front, scanning the street. Then they left, their car rolling away quietly, the night swallowing the flashing lights. When the house was still again, the father stood in the kitchen, hand on the counter, trying to keep himself upright. The pool float had stopped tapping. The water outside was a dark, smooth sheet. The open padlock and the key fitting it had turned his fear into something else, something sharper, something that didn't melt away with daylight. He locked the sliding door and added another wedge, then another. He dragged a heavier chair and braced it, not caring how it looked. He went to the hallway and stood outside his daughter's bedroom for a long time, listening to her breathing. Her mother had already passed, and he wished with a desperate intensity that made his chest ache that she could have been there for this moment. Not as a ghost, not as anything impossible. Just as the other adult who would have stood beside him and said, "Okay, we do this step by step." He couldn't call her. So he did the next best thing. He called the neighbor again, and this time the neighbor answered, groggy but alert the moment he heard his voice. "You okay?" the neighbor asked immediately. "No," he admitted, "but my daughter is. The officers came. They found something." He didn't explain everything over the phone. He just asked quietly if the neighbor could come by in the morning, if he could help him install motion lights, if he could help him check the fence line in daylight. "Of course," the neighbor said, voice firm now. "First thing." After the call, he sat on the living room floor with his back against the couch, staring at the dark hallway. He held the old key in his palm. His fingers closed around it. He tried to come up with a story that made it harmless. The padlock model common, keys reused, coincidences piling up, but the chime in the night had been real, the padlock hanging open had been real, the key fitting it had been real, and his daughter, small, fragile, trusting, was asleep in a room down the hall, dreaming her child dreams, unaware of how close the world had come to stealing her from him. He didn't sleep. He watched the hallway until morning light began to leak in. When dawn finally arrived, he moved through the house like a man twice his age. He made coffee he didn't drink. He checked locks he'd already checked. He opened his daughter's door and watched her sleeping face until she stirred. She blinked up at him, confused. "Daddy?" she murmured. "Why are you awake?" He forced a smile. "Bad sleep," he said softly. "Come here." She sat up and held her arms out for him, and he lifted her into his lap, pressing his face briefly into her hair like he needed to remember her scent just to stay stable. "Are we safe?" she asked quietly, as if she already knew the question mattered. He swallowed. "We're going to be," he promised, and this time it wasn't the kind of promise you throw into the air. It was the kind you build with screws and lights and routines and never ever assuming. She leaned back against him and stared past his shoulder toward the kitchen. "The bell didn't ring," she said. "No," he whispered. "It didn't." She was quiet for a moment. Then, very softly, she said, "Mommy told me to wait last night." His throat tightened. He didn't answer right away. He didn't want to encourage anything that would turn grief into fear. But he couldn't ignore her either. "You waited," he said instead, "and that was the right thing." She nodded slowly, like she accepted that. Then she looked up at him and said something that made his blood go cold all over again. "Daddy, I didn't open the back door last night," she whispered, "but I heard it open." He froze. "What do you mean you heard it open?" She pressed her lips together, eyes glossy with the seriousness of a child trying to be believed. "I heard the click," she said, "and I heard footsteps, not in my room, in the kitchen, and then the bell rang." He stared at her, mind, flashing to the gap he'd seen before, the way the curtain moved, the way air could sneak through. And then he heard it too. A tiny sound from the back of the house. Not the chime, not a creak. A soft, deliberate click, like a latch settling into place. He turned his head toward the kitchen, holding his daughter tighter, and from the direction of the sliding door, the chime gave a single, gentle ring. He didn't move right away. The chime's sound faded, leaving behind a silence so complete it felt manufactured, like the house had decided to hold its breath along with him. His daughter was still in his arms, small and warm, her cheek pressed into his chest, her fingers curled into his shirt like she was anchoring herself to something solid. He listened, not with his ears alone, but with his whole body, for the shift of air, for the settling of wood, for anything that didn't belong. Nothing came. He carried her slowly into the living room and sat on the couch, keeping her close, one arm wrapped around her back. Morning light had fully arrived now, filling the space with that pale, honest brightness that makes things look less dangerous than they felt hours before. "You said you heard the click," he said quietly, careful not to sound alarmed. "Show me what you mean." She slid off his lap and walked back toward the hallway, barefoot, cautious. She stopped near the kitchen and pointed, not toward the door itself, but lower, near the frame. "Here," she said, "like this." She mimicked the sound with her mouth, a soft, deliberate click, not sharp, not loud, the sound of something settling rather than breaking. His stomach twisted. He knelt and examined the lower part of the sliding door track, running his fingers along the metal rail, the rubber seal, the spot where the frame met the wall. He pushed lightly. The door didn't open, but it did shift. Barely. A millimeter of movement, enough to let the seal flex, enough to let air pass through, enough to move the chime. He closed his eyes for a moment. This wasn't someone standing there watching. It wasn't a presence. It wasn't anything unseen and impossible. It was worse and better at the same time. It was a house that had aged, a frame that had warped just enough over the years, a door installed slightly off-true, a track that expanded and contracted with heat and cold, and a latch that gave the illusion of certainty while still allowing movement under pressure. He pressed harder this time, bracing his shoulder against the door. The frame flexed again, faintly, and the chime gave a tiny shake. There it was. The explanation didn't erase the fear, but it reshaped it into something he could work with. "You didn't open it," he said softly to his daughter. "You were right. The door moved on its own." Her shoulders relaxed just a little. "But the gate?" she asked. He exhaled slowly. "The gate," he repeated. "We're going to talk about that too." He guided her back to the couch and turned on a cartoon at low volume, not to distract her completely, but to give her something familiar, while he thought. The padlock. The key. That part still didn't sit right. An hour later, the neighbor arrived, tool belt slung over his shoulder, eyes alert now that daylight made everything less abstract. Together, they went into the backyard. In the clear morning light, things looked different, less threatening, more honest. They examined the pool gate first. The new latch was solid, the padlock heavy. The neighbor tested it, pulling, pushing. "Lock itself is fine," he said. "But see this?" He pointed to the gate's hinge side. The wood post it was mounted to wasn't perfectly vertical anymore. Years of weather, slight soil shift, tiny movements over time. enough that when pressure was applied just right, the gate could twist slightly, transferring force to the lock. "If someone leaned on it from this angle," the neighbor continued, demonstrating gently, "it could put stress on the lock. Mechanism, not enough to break it, enough to make it vulnerable." "Vulnerable how?" he asked. The neighbor crouched and showed him the latch housing. "Some padlocks, especially this model, will disengage if torque is applied consistently while the shackle is under load. Not common, but possible." "So it could open without a key?" he asked. The neighbor shook his head. "Not fully. But if it had been unlocked once before or partially engaged, it could pop." The old key burned in his pocket. They moved to the sliding door next. The neighbor ran his hand along the frame, then frowned. "This door's out of square," he said. "See how the gap widens at the top when I push here?" He demonstrated, and the chime trembled softly. "That bell is doing its job," the neighbor said, "but the door shouldn't move like this. Needs adjustment, possibly a new track." "And the key?" he asked quietly. The neighbor looked thoughtful. "Old padlock key, most likely. Previous owner, previous gate, who knows? You found it because things are shifting. Old stuff comes up when the ground settles." It wasn't a perfect explanation, but it was plausible. Real. Grounded. The world hadn't conspired against him. It had simply been careless in the way the world often is. He nodded slowly. By midday, they had installed motion lights along the fence line, adjusted the gate post, and added a secondary locking mechanism that didn't rely on a single point of failure. The neighbor helped him shim the sliding door frame, temporarily, and showed him where a professional would need to reinforce it properly. All of it was loud, drills, metal, movement. All of it felt like control returning piece by piece. His daughter watched from inside, occasionally pressing her hands to the glass, observing without trying to open it. When everything was finished, he locked the gate, tested it himself, then tested it again. It didn't move, not even a millimeter. He stood there for a long moment, looking at the water. It was still water, just water, but now it had boundaries that didn't lie. That evening, the house felt different again. Not tense, not crowded, grounded. He made dinner while his daughter colored at the table. She drew the house this time. Doors, windows, a big square around the pool with an X through it. "Is that a fence?" he asked. She nodded. "A strong one." After dinner, he walked her through the house, calmly, deliberately. "This door," he said, touching the sliding glass, "doesn't open unless Daddy opens it." She nodded. "This gate," he continued, showing her through the window, "stays locked all the time." She nodded again. "And if something feels wrong," he finished, crouching to her level, "you stop. You wait. You come find me." She thought about that, then reached out and took his hand. "Like Mommy says," she whispered. He swallowed, then nodded. "Like Mommy says." Her mother had already passed. That truth didn't change, but her habits hadn't passed. Her insistence on waiting, on checking, on not trusting, almost safe. Those things were still here. That night, he put his daughter to bed and stayed until her breathing deepened. He adjusted the door so it was open just the way she liked it, then walked back to the kitchen. He stood by the sliding door one last time. The chime was still. He pressed lightly against the glass. Nothing moved. He locked it, checked it, then turned off the light. For the first time in days, he slept. Not deeply, not without dreams, but enough. In the morning, sunlight filled the house again, honest and bright. His daughter ran into the kitchen in her pajamas, smiling, alive, carrying her stuffed animal by one arm. "Daddy," she said, "the bell didn't ring." He smiled back, A real one this time. That's because it didn't need to. She climbed into his lap and wrapped her arms around his neck. "Mommy says thank you," she murmured. His chest tightened, but it didn't break him this time. He held her and looked around the house, the doors, the locks, the quiet, and understood something clearly at last. Protection didn't come from miracles. It came from paying attention, from fixing what felt wrong, from waiting when waiting mattered, and from loving a child enough to never assume the world would keep her safe on its own.